Hey, what is up, mortals? It is Bone Loss here with a new video for you. Welcome to the second part of What If Deku Had the Rinnegan. I just wanted to greet you guys by saying sit back and relax. You're in for a treat. So we begin. No matter how he spun it for himself, Izuku knew as soon as he got home that All Might had in fact been right. He had been the cause of all that destruction. Meaning his quirk actually did something. Even though he'd spent so long hoping for it, Izuku hadn't really let himself hope. When he got home, the first thing he did was rush upstairs, sparing only a brief glance at the TV, where a news station had caught All Might delivering the bottled villain to the police station. That was interesting and all, but he could catch up on All Might news later. For now, he had something to do. For the first time in his life, Izuku walked up to the bookshelves that lined his room, picked up one of his earliest notebooks, and smiled at it fondly. He'd only been 6 when he got it, as the messy, childish scrawl of Izuku's Hero Quirk Notes indicated. Unlike his hero analysis for the future series, Hero Quirk Notes had been meant to be a series of notebooks on Izuku's analysis of his own quirk. Unfortunately, there'd not been anything to analyze. Until now, that is. He carefully opened it, seeing the only filled-out page in front of him, a messy depiction of Izuku's own face as he had been when he was a kid, drawn with bad crayons and with a questionable resemblance to reality. Beneath his eyes, Izuku had written in with an actual pen, "Lots of cool circles in my eyes. I wonder what they do." After that, nothing. Nothing but blank pages. He'd left his theorizing to quirk theories for Izuku's future book. Slowly, Izuku picked up a pen and started writing. It didn't take as much as a week before Izuku found himself in an old beach somewhat nearby. Dagoba Municipal Beach was a sad sight to see, honestly. Kicking the sand under his feet while he walked across what was essentially a junkyard, Izuku took a few moments to wonder how this place had looked at its prime. It must have been beautiful, with sunsets to die for. Now all that's left is trash. On the bright side, absolutely no one came here, ever. His 2 options for safe-ish places to practice his quirk were this beach and a warehouse near Hosu, which was almost an extra hour away, and would thus be absurdly inconvenient to get to. No, Izuku thought, taking in a deep breath. This place would do. It had been a week since the sludge villain incident, and here's what Izuku had managed to suppose so far. His quirk wasn't, as All Might had initially presumed, a force field. Rather, due to a lot of fooling around back home, Izuku had, much to his absolute glee, managed to attract a pencil to his hand, and then his face. It had only happened once, when he'd been particularly frustrated with his own inability to summon forth the abilities All Might described, but it was proof enough. Something had happened. As far as he could tell, Izuku's quirk, or at least this aspect of it, concerned itself with attractive and repulsive forces, which would, in a weird way, make it a mutation of his mom's own. She'd be happy to hear that, he was sure. He couldn't be sure if it had to do with vacuums, gravity, or some special quality of the quirk itself, as he hadn't managed to do it again quite yet. But, Izuku mused, looking around at all the junk, that would very soon change. Focus, he told himself. Focus and try to remember how you felt. Sludge had been crawling across his body and flooding into his mouth and nose. He'd clawed at it relentlessly for what seemed like forever as the crushing realization of his impending death collided with his mind. How did you feel, Izuku? He asked himself. What was it that made you able to do that? Focus, he repeated. He just had to focus. There'd been a sensation of something, like a tingling across his whole body, glowing in and from him. From his veins? No, not quite, but close. Focus. Energy. He'd felt energy flowing through him. Was it still there? He closed his eyes, breathed, and stood still. Focus, he repeated again. Yes! There it was! He felt the energy flowing through his body and instinctively reached for it mentally. This was his quirk, his power. It reacted to his will. He could wield it, he knew it, but not freely, not yet. He'd wielded it differently, with a technique. He inhaled slowly. That's right. Before I fainted, I felt something click. A name. He remembered it now. Inhale. He spread his arms, a palm pointed to each side, and repeated what he'd said that day. Shinra Tensei! The world exploded. No, that's not right. Rather, it was like he was aggressively pushing everything away. Unlike last time, this Shinra Tensei hadn't had a radius too much larger than his own body. but it was enough to make a sound akin to a car crash, as heavy metallic junk was sent flying into other junk and broke into pieces almost immediately, along with a violent spray of sand evenly around him as the sphere expanded for a second before fading. He let his arms drop momentarily, exhausted, and let his knees buckle and fail to support his weight, both because he was tired and in shock. Clutching at his shirt, Izuku raised his head and looked around slowly. 2 fridges and a car hull, alongside several smaller appliances that had been stacked on top of one another. That was how many items Izuku had managed to destroy, no, completely obliterate, with this Shinra Tensei. Well, he dimly thought, that's that. Now he just had to tell Mom the good news. Inko Midoriya reacted quite well to the news, all things considered. I mean, sure, she did immediately faint and almost hit her head, which had led to Izuku freaking out about her for a good hour straight, and then the two of them freaking out about it together and crying more tears than what should have been humanly possible, but aside from that, she took it well. Being perfectly honest, Mom had always been a little suspicious of Izuku's quirk for some reason. She'd never quite shared in his enthusiasm about it, though she'd still felt for his dream as each passing year dug at a deeper grave. He'd never quite grasped the why. But there was a relief to Ingo's eyes when he explained that his new quirk seemed to be a mutation of her own that couldn't be explained solely by her son now having a proper quirk for heroism. Izuku didn't mind, though, because that was his mother, the only family he really had, since they didn't talk to Dad all that often for a myriad of reasons. Having Inko on his side also gave Izuku the confidence he needed to address the elephant in the room. See, Izuku wanted to get into UA. He had the knowledge to pass the theoretical exam quite easily, he knew, but the practical was a bit of a problem. Because Izuku was scrawny and unathletic and had exactly a week and a day's worth of experience with his quirk, where everyone else would have had their whole lives. Essentially, Izuku had 10 months to play catch up on 10 years worth of experience with his quirk, as well as, like Inko said, get in shape. That's about 304 days, minus the week and a day he'd already spent, so 296 days. He didn't want to go into it underprepared, so even though he had had only that many days, not nearly enough if you asked him, Izuku still took another week off for research and planning purposes. If he was going to do this, he decided he'd do it right, and that included a great many things. As far as he could tell, the odd energy, chakra, he manipulated through his eyes wasn't really dependent on fuels like so many quirks were, but that didn't mean he could slack off in his eating habits. With Inko's help, they managed to come up with a good diet to follow for the duration of Izuku's training, one that wasn't too strict, but still supplied him with everything he'd need. After some thought, Izuku decided to say no to his mother's offer of quirk counseling. It had been tempting, but he knew that she'd struggled enough without having to pay for that on top of everything. Instead, training his quirk on Dagoba Beach was the lifeline of his plan, with a lot of exercise that he and Ingo had agreed would serve him best on the side. Izuku's aim wasn't to become as fit as he possibly could be, though he wouldn't say no to that if there had been time. It was to make sure he was as fit as he could be while still focusing most of his energy on figuring out his quirk. During the day, he'd run laps around town and lift weights they'd bought in the comfort of his room, usually while listening to recorded classes to make sure he was up to par for the exam ahead. Then, during the entire afternoon, Izuku would head to the beach and test his quirk. As he'd previously thought, his quirk, Deva Path, something in his mind told him it was called, concerned repulsive and attractive forces. What was new were the extents to which he could wield those. Both the Shinra Tensei and the newly named Bansho Tenin were amazingly versatile in that they could be expanded or narrowed down to a single target, depending on his will and the amount of energy he spent on it. A trick he'd like to learn was using his repulsive abilities to fire small projectiles. There was a risk to it. He could control the area of his repulsion, but not necessarily its intensity all that well. But it was a good, long-ranged ability without much collateral damage. Taking a nail between 2 fingers and with as little as a thought, watching it pierce through several car hulls in a line was both terrifying and amazing. Honey is a free browser add-on available on Google, Opera, Firefox, Safari. If it's a browser, it has Honey. Honey automatically saves you money when you check out on sites like Amazon, Papa John's, Kohl's. Wherever you shop, it's a good chance that Honey can save you money. All you have to do when you're checking out at these major sites is click that little orange button, and it will scan the entire internet and find discount codes for you. It takes 2 clicks to install Honey. Now, anytime you check out, Honey will scan the entire internet and find coupon codes for you. If there is a coupon code, they will find it. And if there's not a coupon code, you can rest assured that you're getting the best price possible, and there is literally not one available on the internet. If you install Honey right now, you can save like $50 to $100 on your shopping doing nothing. There's literally no reason not to install Honey. It takes 2 clicks, 10 million people use it, 100,000 5-star reviews. Unless you hate money, you should install Honey. It took some time to control, of course. His abilities came to him naturally, but this odd, latent talent would only take him so far. What Izuku needed was experience with his quirk. With something that was essentially a new limb for him to control, something most had had years of experience with. All things considered, he was surprised with how easily these abilities came to him, and a little weirded out after some time at the names they'd all but came with. What scared him most of all was the feeling he got, like there was more he could be doing, a third ability to unlock, one he knew the name of but didn't dare invoke. Just the thought invoked images of devastation on a scale Izuku didn't dare dwell on for long, and that was as much as he needed to stray away from it for now. Whatever this Chibaku Tensei was, Izuku knew for a fact he shouldn't mess with it. And as far as weaknesses went, so far Izuku had only discovered 2. 1, he had an admittedly large reserve of the odd energy that was chakra, being generated by and running through his body at all times. This energy was essentially the fuel for his abilities, and could run out if he went haywire. The chakra needed for a technique was proportional to how large an area he wanted it to affect. 2, there seemed to be a static period of 5 seconds on the clock between each use of the Devapath's abilities. Not too much time, but he could see it coming back to bite him if he got complacent, and there seemed to be nothing Izuku could do to reduce this period. His attempts at endurance training had done nothing but exhaust him. Maybe he needed more experience. Regardless, eventually the time ran out. By the time the UA exams came around, Izuku felt as if he was ready. Truly ready. Looking at himself in the mirror for the last time that day, Midoriya Izuku took the time to compare himself with the him of 10 months ago. His height hadn't changed much. He'd gained an inch or two at best, but there was a calmness to his posture now. A faint confidence he wasn't sure when he'd gained. Sure, Izuku was still a mess when it came to people. He stuttered and stumbled and feared, but he knew what he could do now. Knew himself and his abilities. Knew he was enough. With a nod to himself, a nod to the him who'd lacked the power to bring about his own dream, Izuku headed out. He was ready. Only a few hours later, Izuku learned the truth. He had not, in fact, been ready. His day had started out great. He'd almost made a fool of himself by tripping and falling on his face, only saved by the help of a really nice girl with rosy cheeks who'd made him float somehow, and to whom he'd barely been able to speak. Then he'd been reprimanded by some boy in glasses for his habit of stuttering, even though literally present Mike was their exam proctor. "If you are here to interrupt the exam," he had said, "then I must ask you to leave at once." Izuku had almost died on the spot. He'd gained some confidence, but not that much. And now, "Start!" President Mike's voice rang out. "What are you waiting for? There aren't any countdowns in the real world." Now he was expected to fight robots, of all things. Not that he couldn't. If anything, Izuku felt that he was a bit overqualified in wrecking machinery, but it still felt outlandish. Yue was absolutely insane, but he sprang to action nonetheless. There, 2 robots right in front of them all. He was far from the fastest in the bunch. He knew that, and he didn't want to be the one behind someone else failing their exam, but this was his dream. Reaching out with his hands towards the robots, he pushed. And as always, their feet rose off the ground and the 2 robots were smashed into the fake building behind them, with surprising force, exploding as they collapsed into themselves. That's 2. He didn't wait long enough to hear the gasps of surprise. Instead, Izuku slid under the legs of a boy who'd stopped to gawk and grabbed from the smoldering pile that were once the robots a handful of screws and sharp shrapnel. They had dug into his hands a bit, but he didn't care. It would help him. His strategy after that was simple. See a robot, blow it up. Usually by sending very sharp and very fast projectiles into its chassis from afar to make sure he kept up momentum. That being said, Izuku's preferred form of attack was melee, and though punching through the robots with his hands was technically possible, it wasn't exactly effective unless they were the one-pointers, which he managed to wreck with nothing but a scraped knuckle to show for it. Instead, he lured in small grounds at him when he could, then with a single Shinra Tensei, turned them all into scrap metal. Shinra Tensei destroyed all kinds of robots with ease. The hard ones, the easy ones, it didn't matter. Metal broke. 5, 10, 20, 25, 30. But there were only some 2 minutes left. Izuku was confident he'd racked up about 55 villain points. At this point, there weren't many villain bots left. The destruction was a sight to behold. Skidding through the concrete in his rush to find more bots, he took only a second to look around in awe. Buildings were burned and broken, with shrapnel and metal pieces scattered around like bodies on a street. Were this not a fake city, it'd be an apocalyptic sight at the very least. Ah, there they are, he thought, looking to the right. Some villain bots. Boom! The sound of an earthquake shook the ground under his feet. His balance disturbed, the greenette took a moment to make sure he didn't fall to the ground. Earthquakes were common in Japan, of course, but right now? It was then that he saw it. The silhouette in the distance, looming high above the faux buildings, with red lights shining menacingly as it destroyed the city by merely walking, step by step. The zero-pointer. The arena trap. Faced with such an enormous creature, Izuku couldn't help but feel scared for a second. Something that enormous shouldn't exist. He was barely half as tall as the thing's foot. I have absolutely no reason to face that thing, Izuku muttered. The arena trap was just that. A trap. A distraction. The best thing to do under those circumstances was to look for more villain bots, and... Ah! A familiar voice. The sound was a pained yelp between a whimper and a scream. His head whipped back instantly, recognizing the sound as soon as he'd heard it. There, under rubble that the zero-pointer had created, was a girl. The very same girl that had helped Izuku earlier. The one with the rosy cheeks and sunny disposition. Unlike then, her face now was covered in grime and twisted in pain, sweat and nausea clear on her eyes. Her leg, he muttered. It's stuck. Izuku looked up at the zero-pointer again. Could he win against such a thing? Probably not. His Shinra Tensei was powerful, but not that much. At least not yet. And even if he did go for the legs or anything like that, the zero-pointer was large enough that its collapse would certainly kill anyone underneath it. Unless he could destroy the head or throw it to the side with immense force, it would keep marching or fall forward. Forward towards the nice girl. That's not gonna happen. He could try to pull her with Bansho Tenin, but that would drag her leg against the rubble and possibly damage it further. And then she wouldn't be able to walk at all. Causing more damage would be the worst thing he could do. About 40 seconds till the zero-pointer got to them. Damn it! Damn it! His eyes narrowed, and with a shout, he took off in a dead sprint towards the girl. Hey! He called out to her, immediately stopping next to her fallen form. Can you walk? Even as he spoke, Izuku pulled the rubble that had been trapping her legs. With Bansho Tenin, lifting the heavier stone was easy enough, and he managed to get the smaller ones out of the way easily enough. No, the girl admitted, pain clear in her voice. I think my ankle's twisted. Could be worse. He tried to cheer her up. 30 seconds till the thing got to them. It could be broken. Boom. Boom. Each step was like a localized earthquake. Hard to be cheered up when death was marching towards you, he thought dimly. What kind of exam even was this? 25 seconds. Izuku shot pieces of rubble into the robot's head, and they impacted violently. But other than buying them a few seconds, they weren't large enough to truly wreck it. Damn it! But earlier, the girl had stopped his fall by making him float, right? He turned toward her. What's your quirk? He questioned. She blinked. She looked a little out of it, Izuku thought. Maybe she'd been concussed. He couldn't be sure, but her answer came out nonetheless. Zero gravity. I can make things float, but it makes me a bit nauseous. Then, if you did that to me and I jumped, would I be able to reach the robot's chest? A pause. Yeah? A bit hard for me, though, but I can do it. She looked determined, now in a way she hadn't before. There was a fire in her eyes that told him all he needed to know. Izuku bent his knees, his back turned toward her, and said, as he prepared to jump, Now! 5 fingertips gently touched his back, and then he was floating. Following the impulse of his kick off the ground into the sky, the zero-pointer above. The wind raged against his face, and his heart roared in his ears. He had to stop it. He ascended, and then thrust his arms forward. Now, Shinra Tensei! He screamed, pouring all his strength into the technique. His eyes responded to his will. If the zero-pointer's steps had been an earthquake, this was the apocalypse itself. Thank you all for indulging yourselves in the story thus far. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, there are a few things that I'd like to go over before the video ends. Firstly, we've got a second channel called Anime Deep Dive. Anime Deep Dive goes deep into the facts and lore of a wide variety of anime. It's sure to expand your weeb knowledge for all kinds of series, guaranteed. On top of that, we have a third channel called We the Celestials Naruto What Ifs. It's what we do on this channel already, but in the vast world and lore of Naruto. Go check it out if you're in the mood for some jutsu action. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. Lastly, if you're interested in what we do here at We the Celestials, then I would like to extend out an invitation to join the team. The only caveat being we only accept members 16 years and up to join our crew. You can sign up for whichever category fulfills your interest by joining the recruitment Discord using the link in the description below. Our Discord is an all-around fantastic place to be. Whether you're a fan or looking to join our band of misfits, we're always looking for members to join us. Well, that's it from us for today's video, so thank you all for watching and have a great day.